Hello, are we recording? Yes, we are. Hello, make Idaho better followers. Diana and I are here to talk about the homelessness survey results. And she's going to introduce herself in a minute. But first off, as I always do, I'm going to tell you what Make Idaho Better is if you don't know already. I designed Make Idaho Better to be the easiest way to contribute to state and local solutions. So there's a lot of ways you can get involved. You can go to go listen to your elected officials discuss things in open houses or meetings of some sort, or you can go to community workshops. But those things aren't always available when you want to be involved, and they usually require being at a specific place at a specific time, which might not work for you or might not regularly work for you. So I designed this for you. With only a few minutes every week or so, you can weigh in on important local issues. And then my job is to take that point of view, put it with everybody else's, and bring it to the people that can do something about it. So Diana is a leader on the subject that we're going to be discussing, homelessness. And so I'll let her talk about that in a minute, but I bring this sort of thing to people like her who can do something about it. If this is exciting to you and you want to be a part of it, click this Do Your Part button and just sign up for the email list. That's how you get the surveys, and they just take a couple minutes. And then you'll also get an email about the results in my analysis. So we're going to be talking about the homelessness survey, which for every survey I do, there's like as much transparency as possible. So for this survey, you can see the entire survey, exactly how it was worded. There's a PDF at this link. You can see the overall results here, which we're going to be working through these together. So you can check all that out. And then you can see my analysis, which I've linked here. And the analysis, it really goes deeper than what you can find in those overall results. So if you want to see what I'm seeing below the surface, like the cross tabulations and segmentation, like this is what you can normally see, but I can overlay questions and show like how different groups of people are answering questions, or where they're in line or where they're different. That's what I'm trying to do with these. So we are going to be talking about these results right here, and what Diana and I are seeing in them, and what what Diana thinks about it. So without further ado, Diana, will you tell us who you are?
Well, hi everybody. I'm Diana Lachiondo, and I am about to become an Ada County Commissioner. I will be sworn in on Monday, the 14th. Prior to that, I was the Director of Community Partnerships with the City of Boise, and prior to that, I spent most of my career in the private and nonprofit sectors. Had a lot of time to work on issues around homelessness, think about them, both in my role with the City of Boise as well as in the private sector.
And do you have a visitor with you?
I do. Let me just get him. Come here, little guy.
Wookie.
Whoops. This is my new puppy. This is Mookie. Yay.
And we just so happen to both have Labradoodles. Or is yours a golden doodle or Labradoodle?
He's an Australian Labradoodle.
Okay. So, and we also have similar sounding names. So this is Wookie. Oh, you're going to lay down, Wookie.
We need to be friends. Yeah,
you're a good boy. Yeah. So, yeah. We love our furry friends. Okay, so let's get into some data now. Okay, so without further ado, the first question I asked, this was kind of for context. I wanted to kind of put this in perspective about this topic of homelessness, how often our respondents are thinking about it. I think that's, people might have strong opinions about homelessness, but I think whether or not it's on their mind very often can be pretty telling about a level maybe of commitment with this idea, or how impactful it is on their lives. So that's why I wanted to ask it. So I asked every day, all the way down to less than once a month, and at a couple different levels. Diana, anything surprising here in the way people answer this question?
Um, no, I think to me, it tells me you got outside of the normal kind of service provider realm. I took the survey myself, and so I'm in that green everyday category. But the fact that you have a variety um, tells me you got a good cross section there.
Yeah. So you would have expected people that are kind of working on this issue. If I heard mostly from them, then this every day would have been much bigger. So what stood out to you is that it's all these people down here.
Yeah.
Whereas I kind of saw it the other way because I would guess like the average Idahoan view would be maybe not thinking about this super often, but there are a bunch of people here that are thinking about it on a daily or weekly basis. So I kind of had the opposite take. I was like, oh, we heard from a lot of people that are thinking about this often.
Yeah, I guess, and I don't know if you got a sense of, profession or who the respondents were, but that would be sort of interesting to get a take on.
Yeah. So this was the first thing, Wyatt. So this is for any of you that didn't know, this is the second leader interview. Wyatt Schroeder, the executive director of Catch, which is a nonprofit working on homelessness. We recently did a leader interview on this too, and that was the first thing we arrived at as well. So 70 some of the respondents came from Catch. So they had a link that they distributed. So those people I think are probably that are following Catch are in this kind of group, I would guess. About 100 of the respondents came from the regular Make Idaho Better subscribers, which aren't necessarily already like honed in on homelessness. They're just kind of want to be engaged on and weigh in on issues. And then what does that leave remainder? About 200. Those came from Facebook. And I target people that are basically interested in like community issues, volunteering, politics, people that might be interested in these types of things. So the people that saw it, I would guess that many of those people are not service providers, but are just people that are very interested in these types of things. And then there's a little bit of a opt-in bias here that the people that saw it on Facebook and wanted to click on it and participate are probably more interested in it than most. Okay. Okay, question 2. Have you or someone you know ever experienced homelessness? About 65% said yes, 35 no. And any surprises here?
Yeah, I mean, it's again the kind of the bias maybe toward people in the service sector who were responding or not responding, or people the opt-in bias who care about this issue maybe because they know someone. But it's definitely higher than I thought.
Yeah. What do you think if we had to speculate on, if we surveyed everybody in the state of Idaho to come out to like an average, what would you guess this would be at?
Oh gosh, that's tough. I would maybe see it flipped more likely.
Mm-hmm.
But I
So
know
35, you think maybe you know somebody?
yeah.
Okay. I don't even really have a frame of reference for that.
I wouldn't know though. It would be interesting to include that somewhere.
Yeah. Cool. Um, okay, and this question's kind of overlaps with the previous question. So it says, how likely is it that you or someone you know could experience homelessness in your lifetime? So this kind of includes like if you already know someone, it's extremely likely that you'll know someone. So this is, I kind of wish I phrased this a little differently, but these very likely people are likely people that already they themselves or someone they know are experiencing it or have experienced it. But do you have any other kind of takes besides that on this?
Again, sort of, I'm sure the crosstabs would be interesting to see how often you're thinking about it and how much you feel like it could be a possibility for you. Just really depending on maybe on what your situation is. Are you are you rent burdened? Are you struggling to make ends meet? Certainly you'd be thinking about it more from a personal perspective than that if that's not even in your realm.
Right. Yeah, I think I might have a view like that in here, actually. Could it happen to you? Versus if you know someone or don't. So obviously the people that said they know someone, which is this orange bar here, that was a much bigger group that said very likely, but probably by the way it's worded because they already know someone, but they're also more likely to say that it's likely versus if you don't know someone, much, much, much higher on unlikely and very unlikely. But yeah, I didn't slice it by how often you think about it. That would have been an interesting one too. All right. How significant of a problem is homelessness where you live? Extremely significant, down to not at all significant. What are you thinking as you look at this?
I'm just trying to remember what I put there. I think I wrote very significant personally, and
Very.
yeah, again, sort of depending on what perspective people were coming at it from. Were they coming at it from I'm worried that this is going to happen to me, or is it more like I see people every once in a while who I think might be homeless? I mean, people are coming at this from pretty different lenses. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and then let's speculate again on what you think an average Idahoan view would look like. Do you think? So we saw for not so significant and not at all significant, that's about, I don't know, a little over 15 to 20%.
Yeah,
I would expect that to be higher.
It'd be interesting to figure it out by geography because, one of the things we know is that, and I know you're going to get into this, like what's the face of homelessness, but there's what's our mental perception of homelessness versus what's sometimes people's realities. And if you live in a suburb, kind of in western Ada County, and you don't have reason to maybe go by Rose Park or what, maybe you aren't thinking about it as much, but the reality is you have hundreds of kids experiencing homelessness in your community. You just don't see them. So it's geographically would be interesting to see what that breakout is.
Yeah, and I didn't slice it by that in the analysis. So I do. The county breakdown was about 60% Ada County that answered, and then about 40% were outside of Ada County, and that's I think largely because Make Idaho Better started as Make Boise Better, so we're more established in Boise.
But even within Ada County, I think there could be some pretty big differences.
Yeah, because Kuna, for instance, is pretty different than Boise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Is homelessness getting better or worse where you live? Down from much better to much worse, with an I don't know, and the biggest group saying worse. What do you think?
In terms of, do I think it's getting worse, or do I think, what was my take on it? My take on it is, the conversation around housing affordability coupled with homelessness has been in the news so much, and really all over the West Coast, it's been a huge issue. I know when I dive into the numbers, we're kind of holding steady overall, but people are feeling it maybe in a different way.
So would you, do you think that means like the people that are experiencing homelessness hasn't changed that much, but maybe people are like maybe closer to homelessness than they?
Yeah, maybe
with like rent pressures and stuff.
With rent pressures, yeah, and I think I just think there's been a lot of attention in the media about maybe if not like homelessness, but housing instability and housing affordability. So that's coupling it with that.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay, now we're getting into the questions that were sponsored by Catch, and this question is a little in your face, and I kind of I encouraged Dwight to put this on here. Actually, it's not a typical survey question. It's a little more hard hitting, and it's kind of like, where do you stand on? I think what might be kind of core to this is like, I think how you answer this could have a big impact on how you see different aspects of homelessness. If you think it's people just, choosing it versus not, that could be pretty indicative of broader or other perceptions. So we asked it, and most saying, most in this disagree, somewhere around here, or don't have an opinion. Any surprises here?
Not really. I think it was an in-your-face way to phrase it. So I'm glad that most people agree or disagree. But even sort of putting that out there, I think kind of maybe begs the question for some people. Well, maybe some people are choosing this, and I hear that. I hear that quite a bit. Oh, some of these people are choosing, it's a lifestyle, they're choosing to live this way, and I hear that in a more sort of anecdotal sense.
Right. Yeah. Wyatt was mentioning that, and that like sometimes he'll go to events or something or have conversations, and somebody will come up to him and say, my brother or cousin is choosing it though. And Wyatt's response is, well, yeah, maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that is the case, but that's not how you develop a system. Like, I think it comes down to, is it the anecdote, or like, do you believe that as like, in a larger scale,
right,
broader sense? Yeah. Okay. You mentioned this one earlier. What's like the face of homelessness to you? And this is kind of how we asked it. What image best represents homelessness to you? Whether that's an adult male, female, child, family, veteran, or young adult.
Mm-hmm.
With most people saying an adult male. What's your take on this?
Not surprising. I think when people think of homelessness, they think of, somebody who might be on a street corner looking disheveled, usually a guy, not always. And that's where we have to kind of break through some of that, because while that is a population that needs support, needs our help, it could be the family that lost a job, had an injury, were able to make the rent got raised, they were couch surfing, now they're at the shelter. So, or the domestic violence victim, fleeing with their family. So I think that's one of the biggest things when I'm kind of talking at a policy level, is really having that conversation that there is no, we tend to talk about it as kind of this monolithic group, right? The homeless, and there is no the homeless. There are different groups of people experiencing homelessness, and they need different types of interventions.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned children earlier, like a lot of homeless children. Do you think is it surprising this is so low, given that that's a big population?
No, it's not, just because I think, say you're driving around, you see somebody with a sign, that's an image that sticks in your mind. You don't necessarily see, the child who's just shuffling from place to place to place, or sleeping in a car. You don't necessarily see that.
Right.
And if you're a teacher, if it'd be interesting, again, from the profession perspective, those people who are in kind of that first responder sort of role, they know what's going on with the kids in their classroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, and this one, this is a weighted average chart. So like no, this is a ranking. So the highest ranked things are the longest bars. Those are things that people said they thought cause homelessness the most. With the biggest one being here, mental illness, and the smallest one being poor work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
What stands out to you on this?
I actually appreciate that it's sort of all over the place, because that kind of goes back to what we just talked about.
Not monolithic, yeah.
There's lots of different reasons somebody might experience homelessness. If you interviewed Wyatt, from a very sort of like definitional level, the only thing that really causes homelessness is loss of housing.
Yeah.
Everything else is factors that lead up to it, potentially. But it could be any number of things that lead to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the mental illness component, I appreciate that that's there, because again, it's such an important reason that we need to pay attention to. But and we have very specific interventions that people who are experiencing mental illness and homelessness need. But that is just one group of people, and it's sort of unfairly, again, sort of like lumps everybody.
Yeah, attributing it to everybody. Yeah, fair, totally fair. Okay, here is question asking basically like, should anything rule you out from getting help? Essentially, housing services, whether that's alcohol abuse, drug use, criminal background. That one is, this yellow one is a past felony. This next one is criminal background that's a past misdemeanor. Mental health diagnosis, nothing should disqualify you, or other. Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll scan through some others real quick. That's about violence, not participating, kind of. A lot of these are kind of people's tweaking on the language of some of the bigger categories, or like combinations. What are you thinking about looking at this?
Well, two things. It tells me we maybe have a more kind of sophisticated survey respondent group. Either that, or maybe some of the messages around housing first as a intervention have started to kind of permeate into the community more. I don't know. We'd have to drill into that.
And I don't think we've talked about it. Actually, would you be willing to give a short description of housing first, in case this is the first video anybody's seen on this?
Yeah, so housing first is the idea that, well, let's go back. If you think about sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what's at the very bottom? Food, water, shelter. And it's going to be hard to move up, to self-actualize, to get a job, to address your mental health, et cetera, if you don't have those basics. So the idea of housing first is that you can't address necessarily alcohol abuse or mental health issues, et cetera, until you've addressed shelter and getting somebody into a safe, stable home, not a shelter, actually. So it doesn't mean that's the only thing you do. It means you also offer supportive services, but it starts with housing. And if you try and put a precondition, like you have to be clean and sober before you can get housed, you're not going to succeed with a good portion of the population who really can't address those issues.
Right. It just makes it like way more of an uphill battle, it seems like. One that a lot of people can't overcome.
With families, I think, again, one of the ideas was always, you got to get a job first, Well, imagine how hard it would be to get a job. When you're coming home to a shelter every night, you have certain times you've got to be there. Maybe the only jobs you can get or shift schedule, et cetera. So it really flips that around. We get you into housing first, and then we work on all those other elements.
Yeah. That totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in this now for a long time, so it makes sense to me, but I think it still doesn't make sense to a lot of folks. And for a long time, that's not how we did it. That's not how, as a society, we thought about addressing this issue. We kind of made people go through all these steps, and then housing was the last thing. And that's been shown to not work. So
Right.
flip it around.
Yeah. Do you find that it's the people that don't think that makes sense are people that aren't really familiar with this topic or are kind of in the know, or is there just like, are there experts on this topic that just disagree with this?
Oh, I think the overarching consensus is that housing first is really the evidence-based best practice. And that is, from an ideological perspective, from the right, from the left. I mean, the housing first movement started under the George W. Bush administration. So, so it's not necessarily an ideological thing. But it is counterintuitive to how we have been doing things. Once you can sit down with someone and really kind of explain it, I find that most people get it. But it's still, we've been conditioned to think, oh, you need to prove yourself till you get into housing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think this is our last kind of non-demographic, non-comment question is, how achievable do you think it is to end homelessness where you live? Kind of in 1 to 2 years, in 3 to 5 years, or in 6 to 10 years? And people could choose between extremely achievable to not at all achievable. So the longer the bar, that's showing that weighted average is showing more achievable, with I think 3 being very. So what stands out to you here?
I appreciate people's optimism, and I also am wondering kind of what frame they're in, right? So are they like, in a perfect world, if we just did everything and we had everybody behind it and these unlimited resources, whatever, it would be achievable? And the truth is, it would. I mean, if we had everything we absolutely needed, we could get her done.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dollar amount, right? If you have enough houses.
It's a dollar amount. My thought goes to sort of creating a plan. How do we implement the plan? How much money do we need to make the plan go? And, so I'm kind of thinking along those lines, but I appreciate how many people have said, yeah, it's achievable. Let's get after it.
Yeah. So what, from where you sit, if you had to retake, well, I know you took this at one point, but like if you thinking about it now, how would you answer these ones, from not at all achievable to extremely achievable, given the realities of budget discussions and trade-offs and all the stuff that you're aware of?
So let's back up, because again, there's these different population segments to talk. And so I'll talk about a couple of them, and then we'll go from there. So we have one group that's people experiencing chronic homelessness. And those are people who've been homeless for more than a year or have had multiple episodes of homelessness, and they have some form of disabling condition. And that could be physical, mental, substance abuse. Usually it's a combination thereof. So really, really people who need a lot of help. We know we have, 120 plus people in that category. We just got 40 of them into New Path, so that's exciting. We have Valor Point on the way for veterans, and that won't be all chronic homelessness, but it'll be a big, big chunk. So when I think about chronic homelessness, we could get after that number pretty quickly, especially with the opportunity through Medicaid expansion. So there's an opportunity there that I'm going to be looking at to actually pay for the supportive services through Medicaid expansion. So that's one group. Then you've got your bigger group, right? People experiencing episodic homelessness, families, etc. And we are starting to have a group coalesce around the idea of a public-private partnership around family homelessness specifically. And, I think that's a 5-year timeline, potentially. The X factor, of course, is what's a growth rate? What is because when we talk about ending homelessness, we're not ending poverty, right?
Right.
So what's the growth rate due to a combination of rising rents, stagnant wages, and vacancy rates that make it difficult to get into and stay in housing? And that's what keeps me up at night. And that's what we've seen in some of these cities like San Francisco, Seattle, et cetera, is just skyrocketing average rents meets wages that aren't necessarily keeping pace overall, and really pushing people out. And that it freaks me out. It keeps me up at night.
Yeah, because you could double the amount of services that are being provided, but if the economic forces basically quadruple the population of people that are facing these challenges, you're losing ground, right?
Yep. So it really has to be a both and. And, one of the things that is really interesting is sometimes people don't really get the equation of housing plus homelessness. And, I'm a Boise native and proud to be so. And I remember when we were a much smaller town, et cetera, et cetera. But it will be sort of astounding to me sometimes to have someone in the same breath talk about how worried they are about homelessness, and yet they're sick of all this new building going on. And
it's like the NIMBYism.
Yeah, and sort of maybe a little bit of cognitive dissonance on how interrelated those are. And even if a new development is not subsidized, housing to some degree is like a game of musical chairs. So we have to work on the subsidies. We have to keep working on creating more affordable housing. But when people keep moving here, and if we don't build more housing, we're just going to make it harder for people who are living here to find a place to live. So, and it's a fool's errand to think if we stop building new housing, people will just stop moving here. That has never been proven. I mean, that's what happened in San Francisco, happened in Austin, Texas, et cetera, where they just didn't keep up. And so it doesn't mean we shouldn't be thoughtful and smart about how we build and having it be sustainable and responsible and all of those things. But I think a lot about that. Interplay of homelessness and housing.
Yeah. Okay, I think these are, anybody that's watching, you check out these comments. These are what people think gets too much attention and what doesn't get enough attention about homelessness. It's really interesting. So now I'm going to stop screen sharing, and we're going to kind of wrap up. So Diana, is there anything that, from this discussion or related to this topic that you mentioned, the economic forces keeping you up at night? Like even if we're doing better and better, we could be losing ground. Is there anything else that's kind of at the front of your mind on this topic or from this discussion that feeds out?
So one of the things I always find really interesting is that people tend to talk about it as a city problem. San Francisco is really bad, or Seattle, or wherever. Each city has a role to play, and each region has a role to play. But this is a national issue, and it is affected by decades of real sort of disinvestment in housing. And fruit is coming to bear, or ripening, or whatever term you want to use. So so I think that's the thing that I want people to sort of think about, is that each locality has to get after it, because if you have people experiencing homelessness in your community, then you got to work on it. But what we are seeing to a big degree is an after effect of years of disinvestment. And it doesn't have to be this way. I mean, modern homelessness hasn't existed like this. Really, the 80s were when we kind of started seeing it, this combination of lack of housing meets lack of mental health treatment in terms of that kind of visible homelessness. So, yeah, it doesn't have to be this way, and we can do something about it both at the local level, but certainly at the national level as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think probably a lot of our subscribers will as well. So keeping on. You're doing. I'm rooting for you on this issue and everything else you're doing. So.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye.